Well, after 16 years and 11 months of living at the parsonage, Rita and I moved out on Tuesday. Moved back to our home in Juniata County. So yes, I had to drive an hour to get here this morning, which is a beautiful drive. Driving down along the Juniata River and coming in. But you know, change is hard. I don't know where anything is at my house. Um, we have more boxes than you can count, and trying to find a place for everything. Well, it's just overwhelming at this point. Really, really is. And I walked out of the house, got in the car this morning, and realized that I had left my sermon laying in the house, so I had to run back in and get it before I got here. But we are all going through these three phases of change, and really these words of transition are part of really what all of us are experiencing, not just as a church, but many people as an individual, different things that are going on with change in your own life. And that can extend to family and relationships, to school, etc., etc. But we're just going to take a quick reminder here. These three phases of change include ending, losing, and letting go. That's that first part. We talked about that back at the beginning of May. Then there's the neutral zone. That's that unknown spot. Also a good reference to Star Trek. And then today we're going to be talking about the new beginning. And one of the things that I want you to really notice about this chart is how it depicts the fact that all three of these phases run concurrently. Okay? It's not like there's an ending, and then there's a neutral zone, and then there's a new beginning. They all start at the same place, right? And they all sort of end at the same place as well. There's this ebb and flow that you go through when you think about it. But there's no new beginning without first having an ending. And you can't arrive at that new beginning without, first of all, navigating the neutral zone. And as we've said throughout some of these previous messages in this series, and again, if you missed one, definitely go back and watch them. These are messages, as I say, that apply not only to the transition that we're experiencing as a church, but you're experiencing these all the time. And there's a lot of valuable lessons here for us. But it's important that we remember that as we navigate these phases, we need to remember two things. First of all, change is situational. Change is situational. But transition is psychological. Okay? Change is what happens, if I pick up and move over here. That's change, okay? Some of you would have to really deal with the psychological part of me preaching from over there. That's the transition part, okay? And really, when we talk about transitions, it's this internalizing and coming to terms with a new situation that's been brought about by change. And, when you stop and think about it, our new beginning started several months ago when I announced to you that I was going to retire. And the new beginning for Linglestown life and for you individually will play out over the next several months as you welcome Pastor Rachel as your new lead pastor. Now, in William Bridges' book called Transitions, from which this whole chart comes from, he's got a number of illustrations that really help us understand what new beginnings are really all about. And one of those that he uses is sort of a typical business scenario where the old computers get shuffled out and you bring in new computers? Any of you in business ever have to deal with, changing those kind of... my wife's had to deal with so many of those kind of things in her line of work, and I heard all sorts of stories. But what's the problem? We don't like the change, right? But anyway, he talks about this, and he's talking about old computers and new computers, and when I read that again this week, I thought to myself, oh, this is easy. I'm going to just take myself and put myself in this story. So this is the way it would sound, okay? Reading about me, okay, but inserting me where computers were previously. So it goes like this. The old pastor is carted away. The new pastor is installed, and everyone starts to get along without the old pastor, though it takes quite a while before people are actually comfortable with the new pastor. Now, if you went through those computer situations, you know exactly what we're talking about. But the key that I want you to remember today is that there is a difference between a new start and a new beginning. I want you to remember that there is a difference between a new start and a new beginning. It's pretty simple. A new start is associated with a date. So in our case, as a church, we're talking about July 1st when Pastor Rachel begins her duties as a lead pastor. That's a new start, okay? If you have a graduate who's going off to college, you have a date on the calendar when they're going to move into their dorm. And in the process, you've been going through all these phases of transition. And when the date arrives that your student moves in, that's a new start date, okay? But the new beginning isn't governed by a date on the calendar, because a new beginning is much more than a date on a calendar. Those of you who retired, you may remember the date on which you retired, okay? But you know very well that the new beginning wasn't a day on the calendar. Think about this. There was something that happened in the days and the weeks, maybe even the months that followed, because there was a change that had to take place on the inside. See, here's what we need to remember today. New beginnings are not written on the calendar, but new beginnings are written on our hearts and in our minds. New beginnings are literally the emotional commitment to do things a new way and to see yourself as a new person. Starts are situational. Beginnings come with a sense of a new understanding, a new value, a new attitude, and a new identity. Now, we're going to come back and talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. But, the strange thing about new beginnings is that people want them to happen. People want new beginnings. It's sort of like when you think about graduation. You want to experience all that is new on your horizon as you graduate. Parents want their kids to graduate and experience the new beginning by going to college or trade school or entering the job market. All they care about is that you just get out of the house, right? Come on, that's supposed to be funny, right? Okay. So we want new beginnings, but we fear new beginnings. And after the uncertainty of the neutral zone, we're grateful to arrive at a new beginning. But at the same time, it's scary. It's scary. So new beginnings require something of us, and they require a new commitment. And that requires that in some sense you become the new kind of person that the new situation demands. Let me say that again. You have to become the new kind of person that the new situation demands. You may remember in this series, during the first week, I mentioned that one way to claim the new beginning is to see your role in making it happen. You know, while Linglestown Life is going to have a new pastor, the future is going to be claimed by those men and women who find their role on the way to a new future. So you have to be like Captain Kirk and the Enterprise, who explore strange new worlds, who seek out new life and new civilizations and boldly go where no one has gone before. In the second week, when we were talking about the neutral zone, I mentioned that you know, as a new pastor facing a new beginning, I'd be looking for people who have a spirit of entrepreneurship. You know, we talked about the fact that a pastor wants to look for people who are willing to risk stepping up and stepping out in faith to join in with what God is doing. People who are able to see opportunities and take the first step to bring an opportunity to reality. People who are pursuing their passions in creative ways to respond to needs in the community. If you remember nothing else, remember this today. The new beginning isn't about a new pastor who is replacing an old pastor. The new beginning is about you. Look at your neighbor this morning and tell them the new beginning is about you. Go ahead, tell them that. See, it's not about who stands here. It's about you. It's about you. Because you see, new beginnings are a transformation in your heart and in your mind that says, I'm ready to be the kind of person that the new situation demands. So maybe what you need to be asking yourself or saying to yourself every day until this whole transition happens is, am I going to be the kind of person that the new situation demands? Let me illustrate it this way. A little bit here we're gonna share together in the sacrament. And when Jesus shared that last Passover meal with his disciples, really what he did was he initiated a new beginning. The Passover meal which Jesus and his disciples are sharing, well, it represents the old way. It represents the old covenant. And in the process of keeping the old covenant, that means keeping all 635 laws that go along with it. Then Jesus says this to his disciples. He says, tomorrow, a date on the calendar, okay, there's going to be a new start. Things are going to change tomorrow, okay? And it's going to replace what you have long held as treasured. And Jesus, in essence, says to his disciples, let it go. You knew I had to bring that back one more time, right? Let it go. Let the old way of being in relationship with God, let it go. Let it go. Let it go. Jesus says, I'm ushering in a new beginning. And when you think about it, what did Jesus do in that new beginning? As he initiates it, he says, I want you to know that this is a new covenant. This is a new way to have a relationship with God. You know, in the past, it was all about how many laws could you keep. And Jesus said to his disciples, he said, listen, folks, let's just make it simple. Let's do one thing. And he said, love one another as I've loved you. He said, don't try and remember 635 laws. John, don't even try and remember all 10 commandments. Don't even try and remember 2 of them. Just one. You get the one right, that's all you got to worry about. Just one thing. Love one another. Because if you love one another, then that is going to be lived out of your relationship with God. So in Jesus' mind, this is all pretty cut and dried, okay? Tomorrow, there's a new start. But after Jesus' death and resurrection, the disciples had a hard time. They had a really hard time of letting go of the old ways and the old habits and the old thought processes. And to them, the neutral zone was a burden of uncertainty as people kept coming along and said, well, I have a different expectation of, or I see a dissimilar way of expressing what I learned from Jesus. Remember, when Jesus called the 12 disciples, he called the most diverse 12 people he could find. And I guarantee you that after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, those 12 people, minus Judas, and bring in the new guy, they were all like, I think what he meant was this. And I think what he meant was this. Because they were 12 divergent people with 12 divergent experiences. And there's one in particular that gets told to us in the book of Acts. And it revolves around Peter. You know, Peter, bold, brash, stick your foot in your mouth kind of Peter, you know. He had a hard time internalizing Jesus' new beginning. And you can read this whole account in Acts chapters 10 and 11. We don't have time to read 2 chapters worth of scripture today. But let me share the story, and remember what I said earlier. One more time, just remember this. New beginnings are written on our hearts and in our minds, and new beginnings are the emotional commitment to do things a new way and see ourselves as new people. And it starts are situational, but beginnings come with new understanding, new value, new attitudes, new identities. I just remind you that because I want you to hear how all of that plays out in Peter's life. Now, chapter 10 begins with the story of this man named Cornelius. He's a Gentile, but he's a God-fearing Gentile. And then it moves into, in a couple paragraphs, it moves into Peter. And Peter is hangry, okay? You know what hangry is, right? It's when you're hungry and angry that food's not ready, okay? And because Peter was hangry, he decided that while he had to wait for somebody to make him his lunch, he was going to go up on a roof and he was going to pray, okay? Now, I can't guarantee you this, but if you're hangry and you go up on a roof and start praying, you may have some strange thoughts that go through your mind, which is exactly what happened to Peter. And while he is in prayer, he sees the strangest thing. So let me read this passage for you. It says that Peter saw heaven opened and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its 4 corners. It contained all kinds of 4-footed animals as well as reptiles and birds. Now, y'all just think that's okay, right? But to Peter, this is like, whoa. These are things that I am not allowed to eat. That's part of the 635 rules. And Peter is thinking to himself, wait a second. What are all these animals doing on this sheet coming down out of heaven? And then a voice told him, get up, Peter, kill and eat. Remember what I said about Peter. He says, surely not, Lord. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean. And the voice spoke to him a second time and said, do not call anything impure that God has made clean. And when the vision was over, there was a knock at the door of the house where Peter was staying. And there were Gentiles at the door who wanted Peter to come with them to the home of a Gentile. If you're a good Jew, you don't do that. If you're trying to keep all 635 rules, you don't eat the things that were on that blanket, and you don't go to the home of a Gentile. But when Peter came down from that roof and answered the door, he recognized that there had to be change. And the change came not with the situation, but what happened in here. And what happened up here. You see, Peter, and at that point many of the other early disciples, they were still holding on to all these old habits. Yeah, they had experienced the new start, which was really the resurrection, but they hadn't yet started living into the new beginning. Because you see, to experience the new beginning required them to become new people with new understandings and new values and new attitudes and new identities. And what happened when Peter went to the home of a Gentile simply cemented in Peter the new beginning. You go on and you read in the next few chapters and you see how the church had to come to grips with how are we going to deal with all of these Gentiles who are now becoming believers. And suddenly Peter remembered Jesus' one command. What's that one command? Love one another as I have loved you. And so loving one another for Peter anymore wasn't about sticking to a tribe or to those who only thought and acted like you. Loving one another went beyond all of those human boundaries. And what happened in Peter's heart and in Peter's mind transformed not only Peter, but the church as a whole. One more time. The new beginning isn't about a new pastor. It's not about a new pastor replacing an old pastor. The new beginning is about a new you. It's a transformation that has to happen in your heart and in your mind that says, I'm ready to be the kind of person that the new situation requires. When Peter came down from that roof, he was ready to be the kind of person that the new situation demanded of him. And my question for you this morning is, are you ready for your new beginning?